It is the first Saturday morning of 2026. That's right. And it is Reier on YouTube. Travis Reier jumping in, maybe to share some early portal thoughts as it relates to the Alabama Crimson Tide football program. Big Saturday of college hoops, by the way. Alabama and Kentucky set to get going very early on this Saturday. That's going to be, 11 a.m. Central tip off. So, Nate Oates and his team wasting no time with an impactful game to start the SEC schedule. But yeah, we're going to talk some football transfer portal with you. Appreciate each and every one of you jumping in here. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to Reier on YouTube. Hit that notification bell. That way you'll be alerted to all the content as it shows up here on Reier on YouTube. And as always, if you could hit us with a thumbs up for TR in the AM and the other programs here on Reier on YouTube, that would help us out tremendously as well. One good thing, right, or among the good things about this transfer portal window being where it is, if you have a performance like Alabama had in that 38-3 thrashing at the hands of the Indiana Hoosiers in the Rose Bowl a couple of days ago, you kind of have to shift your focus quickly. You don't have as much time to sort of wallow in those type of defeats like the one the Crimson Tide suffered. I do got the Signetti look going, by the way. You see that? I got the 3/4 zip, no undershirt. Sig's going to kind of make that thing a trend. He's going to make that go viral with the way the Hoosiers are playing. But what about the Alabama Crimson Tide? And I know a lot of Alabama fans, I think right now, after a disappointing showing like that, are looking more at the coaching staff and wanting to see more in terms of evaluations and introspection and where this thing is headed with Kalen DeBoer as he looks ahead to year 3 of his tenure in Tuscaloosa. I think first and foremost, though, as we would all agree, you got to take care of your roster. And that's where Alabama's at right now with the transfer portal. I think you get through this sort of 2-week opening here, and then maybe perhaps you see more in terms of staff and direction where that's concerned. Now, with the transfer portal and movement, maybe you get some hints, maybe you get some indications about where things are headed from a staff perspective, but we'll have to see as we move through this process. What we're going to do here this morning, and again, just wanted to jump on, share some thoughts. Not going to be probably anything newsworthy, just some perspective from where I sit. And by the way, unknown Damone, our guy chiming in here. Um, Unknown Damone says he's already in Tuscaloosa to heckle Modi and the big blue nation. Yeah, yeah. And Be Rich asking if there's any portal entries that have caught my eye to this point. We're going to work through that. Be Rich. We're going to work through it again from a timeline perspective. And for the sake of transparency, going to let you know this is going to be a mashup of what we know, thanks to outlets like On3, CBS Sports, those various outlets that are sort of contributing to this gumbo of information, boy, fast and furious. Not surprised to this point, really, by any of the entries from the Alabama perspective, just from a 10,000 foot view. I talked about this in the immediate aftermath of that loss to Indiana. I don't always think it's a bad thing to have attrition where your roster and where your coaching staff is concerned. And from the early looks of things, I wouldn't say it's going to be a volatile, uh, sort of portal from a roster attrition standpoint. But again, we'll work through all of that as we timeline this thing moving forward and really go back to the middle of December where you got news that you had an incoming portaler, I guess you could call it. And Josh Ford, the Oklahoma State tight end, 6'6", 265 pounds, visited Alabama for that LSU game in November, went ahead and got on board with the Crimson Tide. Of course, you had the change there at Oklahoma State with Mike Gundy out, doing some different things there with that program. So Ford wasted no time, in jumping on board with the Crimson Tide. Had a nice list of suitors, too. And you had Auburn in there. You had Oklahoma in there. And Ford looks like a guy with Josh Cuevas out of eligibility, and depending on what else we might see in terms of portal movement for Alabama at that position, it looks like a really solid pickup. You look at the size at 6'6", 265, you think more inline, hand in the ground, sort of point of attack, which this team needs. We talk about the run game struggles for Alabama, and I think it was culmination of things. Offensive line play wasn't good enough. Commitment to the run as a result wasn't going to be what it should have been or what it needed to be. The running back situation, which we're going to get into here in a little bit, certainly had something to do with that. But tight ends, Caleb Edwards, I thought for a true freshman was really, really good. And I think looking ahead, you start thinking about combinations like Josh Ford, Caleb Edwards. Now, is Caleb Edwards sort of that versatile guy like a Cuevas that you can flex out, do some different things with? Is Ford kind of that guy? Can he bring some of that? Ford had 13 catches for 130 yards in 2025 for the Cowboys. So he did have some production as a receiver. I don't think this is just another sort of extra OL in some ways. You like the size, but with Cuevas moving on, you're going to need also that playmaker type at the tight end position, and perhaps Ford can give you some of that. Now, as you got closer to the Rose Bowl, you started to see more activity as it related to the portal, and that had to do with guys like Cam Howard at the safety position. Howard came to Alabama a couple years ago from Charlotte. Did some things on special teams, really not an impactful guy in terms of the rotation there at safety because you had Bray Hubbard emerging. You had Malachi Moore initially, and then Bray came on to go along with Keon Sabb, obviously coming in. Now, Sabb has eligibility remaining. That'll be an interesting thing to see, what path he chooses. Obviously, NFL draft eligible, portal eligible. Does he come back to Alabama? That same thing is true for Bray Hubbard. I think more so where the NFL draft is concerned. But if you get one or both of those guys back to go along with young players like Ivan Taylor, Zay Mincy obviously could factor into that. The portal, we'll have to see with that position too and sort of how that works moving forward. We know we've got still, 10, 11 days left of this. So, there's a lot written in pencil at the safety position right now. But I think it was interesting that Ivan Taylor, we saw earlier and earlier in games as the season moved on as a true freshman. Now, you got into, again, closer to that Rose Bowl, and you saw more movement. Rock Montgomery, the interior offensive lineman, been around for a few years. He's going to have 3 years of eligibility after hitting the portal from Alabama. The Anniston, Alabama native, Rock Montgomery. Saw him a little bit, 14 career games, not a lot. Seemed to bounce between center and guard during his time at Alabama. That interior offensive line is going to be very interesting. I would be shocked if Alabama doesn't address that area via the portal. Now, Parker Brailsford, does he stay around for another year at the center position? Jaden Roberts is gone. Gino Vandemark is gone. Cam Dewberry is gone. Those were your three primary interior guard types in 2025. So you got a lot to address there. Will Sanders played a good bit of football there at the guard position. Otherwise, Olaus Alinen is also hit the portal. He's a guy that worked at the interior during his time at Alabama. So, you've got some rebuilding to do there, and not just rebuilding. I think you've got to look at starter caliber guys, probably multiple guys incoming where your interior offensive line positions are concerned. Now, again, we get right there on the cusp or right there at the Rose Bowl and the immediate aftermath. That's when you start to see Richard Young at the running back position make the decision, unsurprisingly, to hit the portal. This is a guy who started the season as a starter. By the end of the season, really wasn't in the rotation, Richard Young. So he'll look to move on after 3 seasons with the Crimson Tide. We learned that Hollywood Smothers of NC State is checking out the Crimson Tide here in the very immediate future. Sounds like Alabama could be in really good shape for Smothers, a guy that at NC State this last season, 5'11, 190, 200 poundish, really productive guy, around a 6 yards per carry guy. And I think that's more of what Alabama's got to have, not just at the running back position, but in terms of the cumulative effort of line play, coordination from a coaching perspective, commitment from a coaching perspective, physicality in general, tight ends. We talked about all that with Josh Ford also. You know, Smothers is a guy that averaged, again, right around 6 yards per carry this season on about 160 carries. So he wasn't like an 80 carry guy averaging 6 yards per carry. This is a guy with north of 150 carries that averaged around 6 per carry. Alabama, between really its top 3 running backs this year, didn't have a running back average 4 yards per carry. Think about that. This is Alabama. And you've got your top 3 running backs in terms of carries. None of them hit the 4 yard per carry mark. That can't happen. That can't happen. Even if you are not a run centric offense, you've got to have at least one guy that is north of 5 yards per carry, let alone 4. In Alabama, between Jam Miller, Kevin Riley, and Daniel Hill, none hit 4 yards per carry in 2025. So you keep it moving here. Also, Joseph Ionata moves on from Alabama, more of a pure center. So again, that goes back to that interior offensive line that we were talking about. I guess you could look at some of this movement and connect some dots too, where the potential for Brailsford to come back. You know, he's obviously going into the offseason dealing with an injury. You know, does that impact his decision about, is this really the time to go ahead and try to go through the NFL draft process if you're not 100% and you had the potential to come back and from an NIL perspective, you know, do some pretty good things for yourself. Jalen Hale, wide receiver position, hitting the portal. No big surprise there, I would say, where some of this movement at the wide receiver position is concerned. That, you know, you hear about Cam Coleman and his interest in the Crimson Tide. That's going to be a hell of a list of suitors, it sounds like, right? What, hearing Texas A&M on that list, maybe Ohio State, Georgia. So if Alabama's in that mix, which early reports indicate they will be from a visit perspective, the NIL, the price tag, really for a guy like Cam Coleman, you got to think, even with the ties to Alabama, when you think about old teammates there at the high school level, Red Morgan and some other guys, you're still going to have to really ante up. You got to think for a guy like Cam Coleman. Wide receiver's interesting regardless. I mean, Isaiah Horton with an NFL decision to make. To me, he's an interesting guy because honestly, I don't know how much more he can help himself with the NFL draft. Now, he could help himself with NIL. You know, that's the great X factor now. You know, it used to be, well, that whole sort of viewpoint of, well, if the guy comes back, how much can he really help himself? Might as well go ahead and jump into the NFL process and see what he can do for himself, get closer, go ahead, get into the NFL, get closer to that second deal. Well, there's good deals that you leave behind now in college football if that's the approach you take. And I think you're seeing more and more guys decide not to do that. We also heard from an edge rusher standpoint, wide receiver too. I mean, from a depth standpoint, you know, Ryan Williams, it sounds like going to be back for another year. Lottie Brooks coming off a promising true freshman campaign. Jeremy Bernard obviously moving on is a big hit. So you want to fortify things. If you somehow land a guy like Cam Coleman and you start running him out there with Lottie Brooks and maybe a rejuvenated Ryan Williams going into his third year in the program, you feel a lot better about things. And that's, again, Jalen Mbakwe going ahead and hit the portal at the wide receiver position. I don't think anybody's surprised by that, especially after his first 2 years in the program. I get Kendrick Law vibes with Jalen Mbakwe. I think utility player. I thought he was a great high school player, but really, when you think about it, he came to Alabama without a position, really. I mean, the way he was utilized at Clay Chalkville, which I totally get. I mean, you have that sort of guy that you can just get the ball to with immediacy, and not really enter a middleman into the equation. I totally understand it, but started out at corner at Alabama, didn't seem to be maybe overly happy there. Moves to wide receiver. Well, you do that, you jump into a deep mix with Lottie Brooks coming in, and even guys like Rico Scott at that position, Cole Adams, Horton, Williams, Bernard, Derek Meadows comes in as a different type of guy with that size. We'll see what happens. I think Mbakwe can be, again, he can be an effective sort of utility guy in the right situation. I thought Kendrick Law going to Kentucky was a great move for him. Not necessarily in terms of team success, but you saw Kendrick Law in a role that he can excel in with the Wildcats. And so we'll see what happens with Jalen Mbakwe. Yeah, Smothers is an interesting guy. We also saw Peter Nataro, one of the kickers, hit the portal here in the last 24 hours or so. I don't think that's a huge surprise. Connor Talty has multiple years, I think, of eligibility remaining. And as crazy as this sounds, I thought Connor Talty down the stretch of the season was actually one of the true bright spots for Alabama. Not just, in terms of certainly special teams and specialists, made the big kicks at Oklahoma on the road, made a kick against Indiana in the Rose Bowl. Now it's just getting Talty where he can make kicks in Tuscaloosa, and with an emphasis on Bryant Denny Stadium. So let's see here. What do we got in the show chat on a Saturday morning? That's right. We got a Texas fan in here. Jacob says the NC State running back looks real good. I hope we see some O-line help from the portal. I agree. Smothers, again, when you're talking about productive, and not just as a runner, but he's done some good things as a receiver as well. But you've got to get some punch to that run game. There's just no, whether you do that through a collective effort of personnel, continued development, staff upgrade, whatever you got to do. I mean, it's just not sustainable, as we saw once it got later in the season. You really paid for that in terms of Ty Simpson's health. Jacob also asking thoughts on the quarterback room. Will Ty go pro? That's a huge question. I mean, that's really where it starts, as much as anything for Alabama in this stretch of the portal. They're mock drafts, so definitely take them with a large grain of salt. But you see Ty in a lot of those as a first round guy. I think it's a good year to go if you're a guy like Ty Simpson, because frankly, I know Fernando Mendoza is going to go perhaps number one overall or in the top 2 or 3, because quarterbacks have to go. I'm not convinced Fernando Mendoza is the second coming of, say, a Joe Burrow. I think that's where you kind of sit with Mendoza. You either think he's got that sort of upside that he can be Burrow-like, and hopefully a lot healthier than Joe Burrow at the NFL level, or you think he's maybe more along the lines of a Marcus Mariota. I can see both with that, if you're an NFL team. But we do know this when it comes to NFL. They are going to take a minimum of 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the first round. And again, it's not a year where there is just slam dunk guys at the 2 or 3 sort of spots once you get beyond Mendoza. So we'll see what happens with Ty Simpson. I think obviously once that domino, and you've got a couple weeks for that to get figured out too with your NFL guys. I think it's January 15th is the deadline for that. So it all kind of plays in with the portal, with what you got heading up to the middle of the month. If Ty does go to the NFL, I think, you know, your next two guys have every reason to come back to Alabama. When you talk about Austin Mack, which I thought we saw some good things from him over the end of the season, both in that sort of bye game against Eastern Michigan, and then even in his time against Indiana in the Rose Bowl. Keelan Russell, the sky seems to be the limit with that guy. Um, I think you can get a truer mix with Keelan Russell of maybe everything you want from a skills perspective at the quarterback position. You think about guys like Trinidad Chambliss right now, how they can make wrongs right with their ability with that Ole Miss offense, and how he's going to need to do that against that Miami defense, especially with those edge guys. I think Keelan Russell, can give you that. But you still got to have a run game. I don't care who the quarterback is. You have to have some semblance of a run game. I'm not saying you have to be 2015 Alabama in the run game, but you got to at least be like 2023 Washington with Kalen and Grubb and those guys in the run game. Dylan Johnson, he was still a 1,000-yard rusher. Now, I think it was 15 games. But you got to have some semblance of a run game. That's the quarterback situation. You got a couple guys coming in. Jet Tamala, I think, there's reason to be encouraged about him, but that's for more down the road. And so we have also Blaze, I guess, checking in here in the chat. Do you think the Tide will get Cam Coleman? If not, where do you think he goes? I mean, when you look at the preliminary list, Blaze, I'm not saying it'll be totally about the cash, the NIL, but I don't think he's and understandably so, with the money being what it is, especially for his position at the top of that, and really a guy that's a top 2 or 3 overall portalist. You're not going to be able to get him on the cheap. Hey, we love the trollers too, Bap. Yeah. Just yeah, you're gonna get that. You're gonna get that. There were a lot of people waiting on not just Alabama to lose, but to get thumped like Alabama got thumped. There have been people been waiting, what, 15, 16, 17 years for that. And for it not just to happen, but to feel like more than ever that Alabama is on a track that doesn't play into national championship runs. So let's circle back here and make sure we're sort of up to date on the things we wanted to talk about um, in terms of the timeline and everything else. Noah Carter hitting the portal at the edge position. I'm not going to say a total surprise, because when you think about the current setup at that spot, um, with Yanzi Pierre coming off a real breakthrough season and expected to be back. And again, you got to preface even guys that you totally anticipate coming back with, it's still kind of up in the air. There are things, and that's a very valued position. So NIL, salary cap, essentially, what are you able to do for the guys you have coming back? And when you think about Noah Carter in that pecking order, probably a top 4 guy for Alabama in 2025, but Yanzi Pierre, eligibility remaining, top guy. Quay Rusal, eligibility remaining, top guy. Justin Hill played a lot of football this season, so he's got to be a top 3-ish sort of guy, you would think. And then you get into Noah Carter in that sort of neighborhood, and that's before you talk about how they utilize Keon Keeley. I know he is technically considered to be more of a bandit or an end at this point, but we've seen him in the dime package as a pass rusher to go along with one of those wolves, probably more so, I would say more so than we saw Noah Carter in 2025. What else do we have here, gang, before we jump out on a Saturday? What are you doing on a Saturday, really, with no college football, right? Had a lot of college football yesterday. Duke's Mayo Bowl. Well, what a bad injury for Mississippi State at the end of that game with Taylor, the quarterback, man. you're a 5-7 team. You take the bid to help fill out the bowl card. And I'm sure you're thinking, man, what a great opportunity for us to get this young quarterback more reps, get him ready for 2026. Totally get it. I mean, you got to do it if you're Mississippi State. But for it to end the way it did last night, just absolutely brutal for that young guy and Jeff Lebby. Yeah, Jacob also talking about inside linebacker. It's obviously a point of emphasis. You're seeing reports, I know, from Bama Online. I've seen this anyway. Caleb Woodson, Virginia Tech starter, set to visit Alabama. You're losing your top three guys. So totally makes a lot of sense there. He may have some Nakai Hill Green sort of gap bridge value to you. I don't I don't think you look at what's coming back at inside linebacker and think, well, these guys can't help us. But you don't have, I mean, with the three guys you're losing, you need to bring in at least one experienced guy, I would think. I think there's optimism. Caden has been around for a couple of years now. We've seen him on special teams a good bit. Sanders, what you got Reese in that mix too. Um, Boy, that's good to hear. Freedoms. Levy guys in locker room said Taylor was mobile last night. I hope that's true because that did not look good at all. Um, what do we got here? Chris, glad to hear what you said about Carter. One podcast said the staff is awful for letting Carter go. Carter needs to go if he wants. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're not going to keep everybody. You need to get your head around that. This isn't the Nick Saban era at all from that perspective. Nick Saban is the all-time great. But one thing Nick Saban could count on year in and year out, especially before the portal changes, not even NIL as much, but once the freedom of movement went to what it is now for players, Nick Saban knew with every number one recruiting class he signed, every guy in those classes, he was almost guaranteed at least 3 years with that player, with that prospect. You're not guaranteed 6 months anymore. Before the transfer without restrictions went into play and transfer with unlimited number of transfers, Nick Saban was the secret sauce for Nick Saban in Alabama was always player development. Now, the rules were the same for everybody. So that's not to devalue what Saban and his staffs accomplished, but they could count on that. And it was their greatest attribute, in my opinion. Yeah, the recruiting was great. The recruiting was going to take care of itself, though, once the winning started and the NFL presence especially started, because NFL was NIL back then. Now it's just straight NIL and freedom of movement. So, I think Noah Carter's a good player. I don't disagree that it's not a great thing that he's moving on, but I outlined the position for you. How many of those guys are you going to keep? And it's a very valued position. It is a high number NIL position. You're going to have to throw a good bit at Yanzi Pierre, aren't you? Quay Rusal, Justin Hill, Keon Keeley, you got to factor into some of that, I would think. Let's see, what else do we got here? JM12 still having a hard time with New Year's Day. Let's see. I hear you, JM. I mean, it's tough. A lot of reality in that, though. Physicality still matters, man. We can talk about quarterbacks, we can talk about skill, and those are incredibly important still, maybe even more so than they've ever been. But when you look at the events of the quarterfinals, it wasn't for the faint of heart. I mean, there were strikes being delivered left and right. And of those 8 teams in those quarterfinals, who would you say delivered the fewest strikes? True physical strikes. Alabama would be 8th, probably on that list for me. So whatever approach you take to the portal, There better be a mindset taken into account. Guys like Josh Ford coming in at 6'6", 265, great. Does he play like he's 6'6", 265? You know, or are you just going to continue to catch strikes? Because there's a very low ceiling in terms of national championship viability, even in 2026, if you're catching more than you're throwing. What else we got? Yeah, I hear you, Chris, on the staff stuff. We talked about that at the outset of the show today. I think you got to take care of your talent first. You gotta hit this window hard, um, and almost like what the lead up to signing day used to mean. You would get that class signed, and then after that, you would see more of the movement. Now you may see it anyway, and as I said earlier, maybe you get a tip on some of this with the how the how the it's going to move from a coaching staff perspective. Steven chiming in here. The most important part now is want to make up and desire players because getting to the league is not. Yeah, I mean, you got to hit on the intangibles, and you got to, as much as you can. Courtney Morgan, those folks in that department. That's where it's almost like the NFL draft now when it comes to checking boxes intangibly. You got to do your background checks because if it is, to your point, if it isn't more than a payday, uh, it's going to be a problem. I think Alabama's been hit by some of that, even with some of their portal guys. Not to say some of these guys haven't been statistically impactful, but just in terms of how they get after it on a play-by-play basis. Like if the ball isn't coming your way, how do you play off the ball? Things like that. Those are the things I agree. It's hard to do in this era because there are plenty of cats that are all about it. And Stephen also chiming in on um, the weakness, the softness perception where Alabama is concerned. Yeah, I mean, I can't argue that right now, as I just talked about. When you watch those quarterfinals, New Year's Eve night and New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, it would be easy to come to that sort of conclusion. I mean, Indiana looked like Alabama a lot more than Alabama did, and you know that is something I'm sure Kalen DeBoer is looking to rectify as quickly as he can. And you know, as I said right after the Indiana game, Alabama's not for everyone. It shouldn't be for everyone. It wasn't when Nick Saban was at Alabama. Yeah, the recruiting was great. But fortunately for Saban and that program, and to his credit, more so than fortune, um, the work that was put in, the winning that was done, they were able to pick and choose. There were 5 stars that Nick Saban had no interest in because of what we're talking about right now. And there were plenty of 5 stars that had no interest in Alabama because when they came in and watched a practice in the spring or watched a summer workout, or just how Alabama went about its business, it wasn't going to be fun. And some of those 5 stars, they were so talented, it didn't matter if they went to Alabama. They go to places like South Carolina, stay home, go to South Carolina, play for a fun coach and Steve Spurrier, kind of dictate the terms of your involvement. And you're still going to be the number 1 overall pick and play 10 years in the National Football League. Hey, that's great. That is about 1/10 of the 1% that have that luxury. But yeah, Alabama, it's not just a perception issue, I'm afraid, Stephen, and that's on Kalen DeBoer to solve. And it's going to require hard decisions. It's going to require hard decisions about your personnel and not just in terms of your roster. Now, you're getting everything Alabama needs to get out of everyone involved with the program. period. Um, Rich says Alabama definitely overachieved this year. Shout out to DeBoer and Ty Simpson. You know, I don't know. I feel like it was sort of a little bit of both. I will say this: definitely underachieved in the opener in Tallahassee. I don't think there's any disputing that. I don't know how you could say they overachieved in that game. And then during the stretch, really from what was it, Georgia through LSU, I think you could say there was some overachievement in there because I don't think anyone thought they were going to go through that stretch, especially after the Florida State debacle and not take an L. But I would say underachieved down the stretch. 2 out of the last 3 games. It's not that you lost to 2 college football playoff teams in Georgia and Indiana, is that you really weren't competitive. That's the problem. I think for a lot of Alabama fans, yeah, you lose to Georgia by even 10. You lose to Indiana by a touchdown or, 10. And you compete your ass off for 60 minutes. Okay. But the sobering part for Alabama people more than anything was that Alabama did not compete. So I don't know how you say they overachieved in those games. I think it was a mix, maybe. Um, Jeff asking if do you think Kalen DeBoer is willing to change his style enough to become a much more physical team on offense? It's a big question. Again, I just talked about it. I think in doing that, it will require some hard decisions. I don't think, and you knew this when you hired Kalen, so I don't put this on Kalen. You knew if you did your diligence in terms of making that hire, you knew this was not going to be Bryant going to the wishbone in 71 before the USC opener. I mean, this was going to be a quarterback driven offense. But to the point we also made earlier, there is data to suggest that he gets it where the run game is concerned. There's also data to suggest that Ryan Grubb, in his history, it hasn't always been what his employer would like it to be. So a couple of things can be true. I've said this all along. Okay, be a quarterback-centric offense, but there has to be a complementary run game that is legitimate. And the problem, too, I think we're seeing. I'm not going to say it's been a total shift back to say 2005 to 2010. When you had offenses like Alabama and others that were LSU at the time. And, the passing game was important, but they were still at their core in terms of their day to day belief. They were going to physically whip your ass, you know? So I don't think you can run from it. We can talk about the changes in football and everything else. Um, it's going to require, at least some sort of adjustment. It does involve psyche. I've referred to the callus that you see teams sort of develop. Um, and that's what you see, with and give the teams that are left in it credit because I thought Georgia and Ohio State would be the toughest outs because they were immensely talented, but especially where Georgia was concerned, uh, their ability to just maul you and tackle you and just line up and beat you. I didn't think it would require anything fancy from Georgia. And I thought Kirby in the Ole Miss game maybe got a little too involved. I don't think it had to be as hard as Kirby sort of made it. Kirby kind of laned it, kind of kiffined it a little bit, and watching Georgia early in that game against Ole Miss when Nate Frazier in that run game is just pushing for 6, 8, 9 yard runs. You're thinking, boy, by the fourth quarter against this Ole Miss defense, Georgia might run for 350 in this game. Kind of, got in their own way. It felt like. All right, what else do we have here? Yeah, JM points it out. 97-27 is the cumulative score for the 3 losses, not counting Oklahoma. Um, yeah, I mean, that's goes back to the lack of competitive viability, I guess you could say, in some of those games. Florida State, um, etc. Georgia. First impression, last impression, right? Matters in every corner of life. In this Alabama team, first impression against Florida State, not good. Final impressions, yes. The Oklahoma victory, that's why I can't say this. I know some Alabama fans will say this season was a failure, didn't win anything, didn't win a championship. What did Ohio State win this year? Ohio State didn't win anything either. It happens. So I'm not going to say this season was a failure for Alabama, but you are judged largely on kind of what you did early and what you did late, and that's where Alabama certainly came up short. So hey, just wanted to jump on this morning. Also, shout out to the youngest, our daughter Tatum, 24 years old today. Our youngest is 24. That makes me what, at least 40? Thanks, Auburn War Eagle 5084. Says he subscribed. He or she subscribed to the channel. You should too. If you haven't subscribed to Reier on YouTube, hit that YouTube subscribe button right now. Turn on that notification bell. That way you're alerted to all of our content as it drops. We'll have Talk Inside with Chase Goodbread coming up on Sunday night here on the channel. Second helping, our SEC show coming up in the next few days with the encyclopedic Brent Beard, longtime college football analyst and also a voter for the Heisman Trophy. Brent is. So we look forward to all of that. And mostly we thank you for joining us right here on a Saturday morning. It is Reier on YouTube. It is TR in the AM. Have a great rest of your Saturday, great rest of your weekend before reality really hits next weekend, right? Reality, 2026 reality with a punch to the nose coming up. But hey, still got a lot of football out in front of us, still a lot of stuff to talk about where college football is related, and look forward to doing it right here with you on Reier on YouTube. Until next time, so long, everybody.